think there are nuanced differences, tonal differences, messaging differences, but on the whole, I think our foreign policies, or the foreign policies between the two parties rather, are not strikingly different, fortunately, and then in particular, foreign policy with respect to the Indo-Pacific, China and Taiwan are very, very much aligned between the two parties in the United States.
Evan, do you believe that U.S. support for Taiwan will be different to that from Ukraine, given that Taiwan is economically and strategically vital to the U.S. Indo-Pacific strategy?
I think there'll be, so the key for Taiwan, and this goes back to the military question, the key for Taiwan, because we don't have a legally binding mutual treaty anymore, the key for Taiwan, frankly, will be to sustain itself, to prevent and deny Chinese, military boots on the ground in Taiwan for as long as possible. Because if you look at the Ukraine example, we all thought that Putin was going to roll through there and it would be over in 3 days, and then we'd be negotiating with Russia afterwards. What changed that is the Ukrainians, right? They made it so that the United States and the entire international community then had to do something. It wasn't that we thought we'd do something. It was more that we had to, because again, this grave injustice is happening, but the international community needs time to come to that political consensus and to make decisions. And then, in my view, I think they would intervene.
How significant do you feel Nancy Pelosi's trip was to Taiwan?
If she had not come, would have been quite, I think, devastating to our efforts in the Indo-Pacific. I think allies and partners in the region would have taken that as a sign that the U.S. is not committed to the region, not committed to the defense of Taiwan, and that, pressure from China is effective, and they would have seen that as a sign of the future and maybe would have hedged even more back towards China, if that makes sense. So what did happen is she did come, and then what we saw is a number of other countries, parliamentarians, following right in her footsteps. If she had not come, none of those other legislators from other countries would have come, and we would have sort of been set back a long ways in sort of the diplomatic competition with China over, keeping Taiwan's international space, at least from a status quo standpoint.
Evan, do you believe Nancy Pelosi's trip to Taiwan was substantially beneficial, and how much of that was symbolic?
Does the word symbolic mean something, and then what does the word diplomatic mean? Because, if President Biden hosts a leader for a state visit, is that symbolic? I mean, it is, but there's a purpose behind it, right? Otherwise, we would never host state visits, right? If Secretary Blinken goes somewhere and has a meeting with his counterpart in another country, that you could also argue is symbolic, right? But that is literally diplomacy, right? And I would hope that people understand that there is value to that, because it sends signals and it then generates and drives other policies that fall behind it. It's a signal to other countries. And I think that's also equally important. So I think, symbolic is a term that's used when you disagree, with something that's happening. It's a more pejorative term, but the same sort of situation happening, people will say is, high-level diplomacy is a more positive way of saying something.